Welcome, welcome, welcome to, let's see, we're episode 21 of the Marketing That Grows Your Business show. If you are brand new and never been on one of my shows before or one of my lives before, welcome. Also, would you just do me a quick favor because I'd like to meet you? Drop in hashtag new so I'll know that you're new. If you have been with me before, welcome back. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kim Garst. I'm an online business strategist. I love helping people help grow their business using digital and social media. This show particularly is all about talking with other entrepreneurs who have wisdom and nuggets to share with those of you who are building and growing a business. So again, welcome. As you're coming in, let me know where you're coming in from, where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see where you are in the world. We usually have a global audience, so it's always fun to see where everyone is. I'm in Tampa, Florida, and it is hot here. I think we skipped right by spring and just went right to hot, humid, and it'll be this way probably until September or October. I'm like, some days when it's hot like this, I'm like, man, I need a summer home instead of a winter home. So, but excited that you guys are here, obviously, and we have a super amazing guest today. I'm really excited to have, all my guests are amazing, but I'm excited just to have a real interesting conversation. I think you guys will find that it's going to be a really interesting conversation with our guest today. Every show we do some giveaways. This show is no different, except I'm going to do something slightly different today. I'm going to do 3 giveaways, actually 4 giveaways, 3 books, and they are books from our esteemed guest. He has written 14 books. I think it's 14 now. I'll make sure that I ask that question, but in order to win the books and or our giveaways today, as you hear things that really resonate with you, just drop in an aha comment, hashtag aha, like, oh my gosh, that was such a big aha moment. Anytime you hear a nugget that really resonates with you, just drop in some ahas, because that's how we choose our winners for these giveaways. So we're going to be doing 3 books, and these are some of my favorites. This is a book that our esteemed guest, Guy Kawasaki, wrote with his co-author, my friend Peg Fitzpatrick, and it's The Art of Social Media. So wonderful book, chock full of amazing social media related tips. So you guys will want to be in the winning for that if you don't already have a copy of it. And this is another one of Guy's books that is one of my personal favorites. And as you guys can see, he autographed the book for me back in September of 2012. So, and it says this, resisting you is futile. So that's essentially the message of this book, is how do you show up and be enchanting, if you will. So going to be giving away a copy of this book, not my copy, mind you, but a copy of this book, as well as another one of my personal favorites. It's not, I don't have this book yet, but I already know it's going to be one of my personal favorites because I was listening to one of Guy's recent keynotes, and it was all about this book, Wise Guy. And I'm like, as I'm listening to it, I'm like, I know this is going to be one of my personal favorites. It's lessons from his life. And as he was sharing it verbally, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to have this book. And not only have I already ordered it, but I want to give it to one of you guys as well, because I think you will absolutely love this book. So we're giving away 3 books. Drop in your aha moments. And we're also going to give away our sponsors tool today, 3 months of that tool to 3 winners. So our sponsor is easel.com. If you want to win a one of the 3-month packages, don't forget to drop in your ahas. And if you want to just find out more about Easel, you can go to kimgarst.com/Easel. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about our special guest today, Guy Kawasaki. So what I'm getting ready to share with you is just like a sliver of this amazing man, but he is the chief evangelist of Canva.com. Many of you guys are probably familiar with Canva. He is the creator of the Remarkable People podcast. And if you haven't checked that out, we're definitely going to dig into that a little bit more today. but I promise you will be incredibly blessed by tuning into that podcast. So definitely check it out. He's a brand ambassador for Mercedes-Benz. Hello. That just means he gets to drive around a Mercedes, I suppose. And my question is, how do we all do that, right? He's an executive fellow at the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley, an adjunct professor of the University of New South Wales. He's the chief evangelist he was the chief evangelist of Apple and a trustee of the Wikipedia Foundation. So are y'all getting that he's like kind of a big deal? Like, he's got some incredible back end stories, and I'm excited to really dig into some of those today. He's the author of Wise Guy, The Art of the Start 2.0, The Art of Social Media, Enchantment, and 11 other books. I think, like I said, there's 14 of them total. He has a BA from Stanford University, an MBA from UCLA, and an honorary doctorate from Babson College. So like I said, an amazing and remarkable life. You guys put your hands together, if you would, for Guy Kawasaki. Hey, welcome, Guy.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction.
Well, you have quite the life, and it is interesting, and I would speculate that you probably didn't envision the life that you have had when you, like, back probably 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't have seen it coming.
Not at all. If people think that I have a life plan, had or have, they'll be sorely disappointed. I've just fallen in love from one thing to the next, from Macintosh to entrepreneurship to writing, speaking, podcasting, Canva, Mercedes. I just go with the flow.
Yes. Well, I think that's probably because my understanding is you were born and raised in Hawaii, right? It's kind of, I lived in
Yes.
Hawaii. My husband is retired military, and we were stationed in Hawaii for a very small window of time, like 8 months. But life there is just a little slower. It's like relaxed, I think. Like, you just
Yes.
go with the flow. And so that probably goes back that attitude probably goes a little bit back to your childhood. So
Probably.
now that you
not even
go ahead.
not even the coronavirus is active in Hawaii. That's how laid back it is.
That's amazing. So speaking of the coronavirus, we've all been kind of
Yes.
like, right? Like
Mhm.
homebound, I guess is a good way of saying it, homebound. And I noticed on one of your lives that you're refurbishing an old surfboard. So how's that going for you? Did you got it done?
Actually, I've done two now because there's sheltering in place, and for the first 3 months of that, I literally did not leave our yard, and so I ran out of stuff to do, and after a while, you're looking for stuff to do, and that's what I did. I was waiting for the paint to arrive and the varnish to arrive. That's how simplistic my life became for a while.
Toilet paper, obviously, for whatever the reason, is a big deal. So, it's like, oh my gosh, I found toilet paper, or you were able to even find it online and order it in. So it's the strangest
Yep.
small things that have been big things. So I want to dig into your surfing in a minute, but another thing that I think is interesting, because it goes back to learning things at certain ages in our life when you think that you're too old or whatever. So something you may not know about me that we have in common is that I learned how to play hockey at a very late age.
Really?
And you did. So yes, so our boys, and it started the same way. I have two boys. My youngest was barely 5 when he started playing hockey, and played throughout college, and now he plays in the men's league, right? So both my boys
Yep.
played hockey their entire youth. So I wanted to learn how to play, and played on a women's league. I can only stop one way on ice, but I usually just listen, get out of the way. I can't stop. So, but it's not, I guess the reason I share that, and I would love to get your perspective on how you've evolved and taken on things that, you didn't let age stop you. Like, I know you learned how to do hockey,
Yes.
you learned how to play hockey, and then you learned how to surf. How did that evolve?
Yes. Well, our stories are very similar vis-a-vis hockey. I took up hockey at the age of 44. because my two sons took it up. And my wife told me, don't be one of these Silicon Valley dads on the side of the rink or on the side of the field using your BlackBerry. You got to get involved with their lives. So I took up hockey, and from the first time I stepped on the ice, I just loved hockey. And coming from Hawaii, let me tell you, that's quite a statement. So I took up hockey at about 44, and then I took up surfing at about 60 when my daughter embraced surfing. And she loved it so much that I took it up. And I wish I could tell you it's like a conscious act to constantly push myself to learn new skills and all that. But my motivation was not that lofty. My motivation was, well, my kids like it, maybe I should try it. And then I fell in love. So I gave up hockey to take up surfing. And now we live in Santa Cruz, about, one block from the beach. I can be in the water in about 2 minutes anytime. And looking back, I can ascribe lofty goals and perspectives, but at the time it was just doing something fun. I think the lesson looking back again was that, you're never too old to learn something. Now, I don't recommend taking up hockey. If you're younger than 44, take it up earlier. I certainly don't recommend taking up surfing at 60 because that's about 52 years too late. But it is possible. And that's a lesson that, learning doesn't stop when you graduate from an institution of education. Arguably, learning begins when you graduate from a school. And that's an important lesson.
And honestly, it doesn't have to be some sport. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to pivot to the next thing always. I think that's so true in social media anyway. It's a constant evolution. I want to dig a little bit back into your background. I know everybody probably asked you about your time at Apple, and yes. I guess I'm going to be no different there. No, nobody ever asked, but I do.
No, nobody ever asked.
Yeah, that I wonder if I'm just looking back on it, I'm like, okay, what? Maybe somebody's ever asked you these things, but I'm just curious. I know you worked for Apple, and some that are listening or watching may know that you worked for Apple not once but twice, and then they ask you back a third time. And if it's too personal, feel free to tell me so. But why did you say no the third time? And do you regret it?
Well, I worked from Apple from 83 to 87, then 95 to 97. Both times I left to start a company. The third time, Steve asked me to come back to run Apple University. Apple University is the internal program to teach employees, the Apple way. And I turned him down at that time. Steve Jobs was a brilliant visionary. And I don't say that loosely or lightly, because I think in American business, there have been maybe 2 or 3 visionaries ever. Walt Disney, maybe Edison, Jobs, maybe Elon Musk today. So, there are a lot of people who call themselves visionary because they're doing the 10th dating app. That's not visionary. So he was a great person. I would not be where I am were it not for him. But I have to say, working for him a third time just didn't appeal to me. And I do regret that in the sense that if I had stayed either time or accepted the third position, I definitely would have made a lot of money. But I would also be probably an insufferable jerk right now, or more of an insufferable jerk. But that's a different story. So, and you can't change it. I can't go back in time. And, it's not like Tim Cook is calling me up, so I can't turn him down the fourth time.
Yeah. Well, I just wondered about that. One of the things I heard you say in one of the interviews that I was listening to, or maybe it was one of your lives or something, but you talked about how Steve Jobs was a taskmaster. Basically, he was very hard to work for, and he ruled by fear. But you also said that some of the based off of that, some of the best work that you have ever done came as a result of that. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So, in modern HR theory, It's all about communicating with your employees peer to peer, establishing mutual goals, focusing on the positive, always providing that kind of uplifting, optimistic, good stuff. Well, let's just say that that wasn't Steve's style. So Steve was more about ruling by fear and intimidation, not for the raw sense of power, but it was just that his perspective was of perfectionism. So he wanted things to be perfect, and he had a very strict definition of what perfect was. So he was extremely demanding. And I think looking back over my life, the people, both bosses and teachers, that I learned the most from were the ones who were like that. They were the most demanding. They were at the time difficult and perhaps even cruel. But looking back, those are the bosses and teachers that I learned from, not the easy ones. So, that is a lesson to young people that don't always go for, what's easiest and the easiest boss, easiest teacher, easiest course, easiest job, easiest everything. Now, I'm not saying you should be a masochist, but certainly the more challenging bosses, the more challenging teachers will drive you to accomplish more, or they'll kill you. But yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because I feel like my husband is that kind of a leader in the sense that,
Mhm.
he was retired from the military. And when he would, he took his, it sounds like a one on the Enneagram. Yes. So, but he would take, guys into combat and he would ride them hard to get them prepared,
Yeah.
and then, he would bring them home safe and sound for the most part. And so, they would hate him for the all of the, I guess, the depth of the training. But then when they realized how training saved their lives, they'd be like, oh, thank you, thank you. So, it's one of those things where you can't, just because somebody is harsh, think that they don't care. They are probably
Yeah.
coming at it from a perspective of they're trying to push you to
But you,
give your best.
well, to
So
use to
that's what
use
I'm hearing.
an athletic, oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, to
No, go
use an
ahead.
athletic metaphor, think about Bobby Knight, the coach at the University of Indiana, or Indiana University. I hope I didn't insult any Hoosiers just now. So Bobby Knight was one of the most successful coaches, and he was kind of off the wall, right? I mean, throwing chairs and everything, and just drilling his players. But I bet a lot of his former players look back and say, that's where I learned the most about growing up and being an athlete and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a fine line between abuse and excellent coaching, teaching, mentoring, and leading.
So my husband's always told my boys, like even when they were playing hockey, that pain is an awesome motivator, So, you try. It's yeah.
my,
So
my, one, one of my more intense sons says that pain is mediocrity leaving the body.
yes, my husband says something very similar. So they must have been raised up as similar folks. So yes, absolutely. So when it comes to your time at Apple, like what if you had to like put your finger on like maybe one life lesson or business lesson that you took away from that time, what would it be?
If you narrow me down to one, I would say that the lesson of Apple that I learned is that your current customer cannot help you necessarily design something revolutionary. That your current customer is typically going to ask you for something that's a better, cheaper, faster version of what you already have. So back in the 1980s, if you were to ask an Apple customer what would you want, they would have said better, faster, cheaper Apple II. They would not have described the Macintosh. And so if you own a car and your manufacturer were to ask you what would you like in your next car, you'd probably say better, faster, cheaper, more mileage, more safety or something, you wouldn't necessarily, let's go back, before Tesla, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, give me an electric car that has a range of 300 miles. You would have said better, faster, cheaper Cadillac, better, faster, cheaper Oldsmobile, Buick, something like that. And that's a very valuable life lesson, that if you truly want to jump to the next curve and innovate, you can't necessarily ask your current customer.
That's a really good takeaway. And I'm just curious, because I know a lot of people ascribe Steve Jobs as the vision behind, where Apple is even today. So with that said, and what you just said, do you feel like that he was the innovation part of, or was it a collaborative thing? Was it more than just Steve when it came to innovation in Apple?
Well, it was collaborative. Steve decided and everybody did what he said. That's collaboration too. It's a form of collaboration, right? Back in those days, at Apple, like a focus group, Apple's focus group was Steve's left and right hemisphere of his brain being connected in his head. That was the focus group. But that's a hard standard to measure yourself up to, because, like I said, in the history of business, there's only been about 4 or 5, Steve Jobs level people. So that's one of the dangers, that if you think you are the next Steve Jobs, statistically you're probably wrong. And this is one of the challenges of marketing books and marketing advice, is that you pattern yourself against a unicorn, and there are not that many unicorns, so that might not be the optimal way to go, because it's so rare.
It's hard, even when I think a lot of times when we're trying to decide what our business model is going to look like, you look to other models, right? You're trying to see what's been successful, how can you model that and that kind of stuff. And so I think a lot of time, and Jenny is saying one of her ahas was, your current clients can't help you build something newer or better. It so makes sense. The context of what you were saying, you're probably right. Even when you're asking your existing clients what they want, what they need from you, you need to think about what Guy just said. And then again, going back to the drawing board from an entrepreneur standpoint, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself if you feel like and I love your thoughts on this, Guy. If we subscribe to what you just said, that we're not the unicorn, and we also know that our existing clients are not going to be the ones to tell us how to innovate, then how do we innovate?
Well, Kim, that's why it's harder to be an author and a guest than it is to be an entrepreneur, because I can spout off that wisdom and not have to solve the problem. I think that if you look at tech in particular, the way great tech companies were built and continue to innovate was by asking a very simple question. And the simple question is, therefore what? And by that I mean that as the CEO, as the leader of the company, you have an insight, you have some analysis, you have a perspective on what's going to happen in the near future. And based on that, you ask yourself, therefore, what should we do? For example, if you go back in time, if you were an entrepreneur 15 years ago, or however many years it started, and you said, well, I see this world where everybody's going to have a phone. This phone is going to have a camera, and this phone with a camera is going to be connected to the internet, so file sharing is possible. Therefore what? Then you think, I'll start Instagram, right? I'll create a place where people can share pictures of their experience. So I think that's that's the genesis of most great tech startups. They if you look back at Apple, the founding of Apple, therefore what? There's more and more computer components, there's more and more of these chips happening and all that, therefore what? They're computers, but computers are mainframes, and no one can use them. There must be a better way. Why do you have to work for NASA or the government or a university or a large business? computers are getting cheaper and cheaper. Therefore, what? Therefore, we should build a personal computer. And I think that's the best thing. The second method to this is that you build what you want to use. So contrary to most marketing theory where you survey the marketplace or you survey your customer, you just reach into your soul and you say, you know, what would you like to use? And you build the Apple One that you want to use, or you build the photo sharing service that you want to use, and then you just hope that you're not the only person in the world who wants it.
Yeah. So finding, I love that. Therefore, what? In other words, what's the next step? What's, you and I both have been online for a long time and we have seen things we can usually now, I'll speak for myself. I'd love your take on it. I can see the hot next thing, usually. And do you feel that way now just based off of the time, the longevity you've had in the space that you're like, okay, yeah, that's going to work, or no, that's not going to work? Do you feel like you kind of have like an
Well,
inside secret on some of this stuff?
well, in a rare moment of humility, I wish I could predict that. That's easier said than done. As a venture capitalist and sometimes angel investor, I've made dozens of bets, right? And I can tell you that I haven't been right dozens of times. So I'm not saying that therefore what is 100% certainty. I'm saying that's the best. Between therefore what and entrepreneurs building what they want to use, I would say they are the richest veins for success. I am not saying they're 100% accurate, however. I have thought I've been right 20, 30 times. I've been right two or three times. I probably have a 10% batting average. And to use a sporting analogy, there is no position in sports where if you succeed 1 out of 10 times, you're considered great. I'd be a dismal failure. I mean, think of it. Think if you're a goalie and you stop 10% of the shots, or if if you're a free throw shooter and you hit 10% of your free throws or 10% of your 3-pointers, you wouldn't be playing professional anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes people look at successful people and they assume that pop, like this magic balloon just popped and then, everything just fell into your lap. But
Yeah,
I feel like I fail every day. And I'd love to know what you feel is one of your most challenging failures.
how
Is
long
that
is this? How long is this conference going to last? I think we're going to be boring your listeners. I give you a bizarre example. You could make the case that Macintosh was a failure, right? Because Macintosh, I don't know, at the peak maybe had 10 or 15% market share. I don't know what it is today, but it's single digit market share. So is Macintosh successful? Hard to imagine most people would say Macintosh is a failure, but if you look at the numbers, it is a small part of the computer business. So, I started my career evangelizing Macintosh, and I'm ending my career evangelizing Canva. And so that's the spread from 1983. I started Canva about 5 years ago. So 1983 to 2015. That's the book. Between a lot of right unsuccessfully. So I mean that's just how life is, and I consider myself lucky to have.
okay? I think we might have lost Guy for just a minute here. Hopefully, we'll get him back. I know we had a question. I wanted to pop that back up, so we'll give him a minute. There he is. All right. Nope, no sound, Guy. Oops, no sound. I think we have the same issue we had before, where we had no sound with you. So if you can try with the other browser, Safari, I think it was. this is the what we call the joys. You have to look at it like that. The joys of live streaming, because you never know what's going to happen. So you guys just bear with us as we get Guy back. All right. All right. We'll get him back in just a moment. So just a real quick question for you guys as we're waiting on him. What do you think so far? Have you learned anything that you're like, oh my gosh, this is applicable to my business, or never thought of it like that? My hope by asking him questions was to, he's
Am I
got a
back?
wealth of knowledge. Okay, do we have it? Yes, are we back?
Oh,
Yes.
well now, do you?
All right, I think we've got sound now. Are we
So,
good?
are you
Go
hearing
ahead.
me?
I can hear you now,
Okay.
Guy. We're good.
You see how my camera switched? So now this whole setup is geared towards a DSLR, and now via the built-in camera. So
Yeah,
our camera is going to suck for the rest of this interview, but
that's okay.
it's too risky to switch cameras, if you know what I
Yes,
mean. So,
yes. This
so this is a good lesson in make sure that both cameras have a good image, because it wasn't my intent that you see how the sausage is made here. So
no,
where did
this
my
is
sound cut out?
yeah. This is the realness though of
This
live
is
video. So it's okay.
well,
It's all right.
now people know that this wasn't rehearsed and pre-recorded. This is truly live.
Ex- exactly. All right, so I'm not sure where we left off at, but I thought maybe since it's a good place to like switch gears a little bit, I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit around your new venture. I call it new, which is your Remarkable People podcast, which I think is
Yes.
amazing, by the way. And what made you start a podcast? Like of all the things you've done in
Yeah.
your career, and like, okay, why a podcast?
Okay, so um, there's two versions of the story. You want to hear like which version do you want? Well, okay, I'll give you both versions. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so version one is that over the course of working for 40 years, I made a lot of connections and contacts. So I have access to people like Jane Goodall, Andrew Yang, Steve Wolfram, Steve Wozniak, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, these are some remarkable people. I should interview them about, how they became remarkable, what made them remarkable, what lessons are there from these remarkable people. So that's storyline number one, okay? Storyline number two is a little different. Storyline number two is when I came out with my book Wise Guy, I was on a lot of podcasts, like dozens of podcasts. And I would, at the end of the recording, I would say to him, so, tell me your business model. I'm like, I don't understand why you do this podcast. And several people told me, well, my business model is advertising. There's an ad when I start the podcast, there's an ad in the middle, and there's an ad at the end. And I said, so okay, so how much do you charge for these ads? And a couple, three people told me, well, I charge 20,000 for the first one, 15,000 for the second one, and 10,000 for the third one. So I'm adding 20 and 15, that's 35, and add 10 more, that's 45, 25, and then I add 10 more at 35, so let's call it 30,000. So I say, you make $30,000 per podcast times 52 a year, so you make $1.5 million in podcasting? And he said, yeah. And I said, what am I missing? Why am I writing books that, it takes 2 years to really get a book out? You get one advance and you never get any more usually. So, and the minute you finish a book, it's out of date. So I should switch from writing books to podcasting. And then I won't have to travel. I can do interviews remotely. Life is good. So that's why I did podcasting.
Okay. So that begs one of my questions is which was are you monetizing your podcast? But you don't have to answer that just yet. I'm just curious as to I know you've formed a lot of relationships and you're leveraging existing relationships, correct?
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
happens when your pool of existing relationships start to, you've got, I mean, at some point, will you max out? Or do you know, like, there's so many remarkable people that you can continue to just fill the funnel, if you will, with remarkable
Well,
people?
yeah, I think there's no shortage of remarkable people. Now, understand that the name of my podcast is Remarkable People, not famous people and not rich people. It's remarkable people. So, for example, a couple weeks ago, I had an interview with a woman named Martha Nino, and she was an illegal immigrant. She was snuck across the U.S. border as a baby. She lived as an illegal immigrant in Northern California for 15 years, but she finished college. She went to work. Eventually, she's working now at Adobe, and she has a remarkable story about how, starting as an illegal immigrant, now she's a successful person at Adobe in Silicon Valley. And so that to me is remarkable. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of remarkable stories in the world.
Yes.
So that's one. I don't anticipate remarkable people. If you look at something like the MacArthur Award winners, that's like saying to the MacArthur Award, the MacArthur Foundation, or saying to CNN, because CNN has this series called CNN Heroes, aren't you worried that you're going to run out of CNN heroes? Aren't you worried that you're going to run out of MacArthur Award winners? And the answer to that is it's not going to happen. Not not
Yeah.
not before I die, anyway.
Well, that was, I love that you said that, because that was one of my next questions was, how do you define who's remarkable? And you just really answered that question within my last question, is that it's not about whether or not they're rich or otherwise. It's
No.
who has those remarkable stories. I love that. Good.
Well,
The reason I
I,
asked that
I would
question was, go ahead.
oh, I would almost make the case that um, wealth is inversely related to remarkableness. if if now, don't get me wrong. If Bill Gates said he wanted to be on my show, he'd be on it. Elon Musk would be on it. But if some private equity investment banker from New York says, I'm worth $5 billion, I'm remarkable, I want to be on your podcast, the answer would be, I don't think so.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And that's why, from a perspective of people who may not know, some of the names that you just shared, and some of the names of people that you have interviewed, understanding that there's a lot of amazing people that nobody's ever heard of. And so
Yes.
I love, and my focus was to really pull in, how do you go about finding great people for your podcast? So for the most part, people, or you've heard of people, and that
Well,
helps you with the outreach.
yes, and then friends recommend people all the time. Recently, I had a friend tell me that you should interview a woman named Nancy Gianni, and I didn't know who Nancy Gianni is. Well, Nancy Gianni has started an organization called Gigi's Playhouse, and Gigi's Playhouse is for people and their families who have Down syndrome. So, I'm not that familiar with Down syndrome, but when I did the research, she was a CNN hero. She has started 60 GG Playhouses, and she's reaching literally thousands of people. Is she a household name? Well, maybe after my podcast, she might be, but not yet. And so that qualifies as a remarkable person. There are people who have, stood up for prison reform. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So, uh, honestly, I think that my podcast is probably the finest work I've done in my career. I could not have done this podcast early in my career because I didn't know what to ask. But now, at the sunset of my career, I think that this may be the finest work I've ever done.
I love the podcast personally. I think it's just very well. I think the sound of it, honestly, is just a step above. It really matters. So Simon is saying there are many remarkable people that nobody has ever heard of. Yeah, I agree totally, Simon. Okay, so going back to Apple just for a second, I think this might be the last
Yeah.
time I mention Apple, but I'm curious to know if 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 there was a vision for podcasting when like the iPod came out, was there,
Hmm.
I mean, had anybody ever thought, hey, this is going to, the long-term play here is that people are going to be listening to content on their iPods, not just music, but other forms of content?
Never.
No vision for that. Interesting.
Well,
Interesting.
well, to be honest, I wasn't at Apple when the iPod was invented, but I think the design center of the iPod was, you know, let's make something that is much better, 100 times better than a Sony Walkman. Because a Sony Walkman, you'd have to have a pretty big pocket to put your Walkman in. And the media was cassette tapes, which were 60 to 90 minutes long. And, these big things that break and, tapes crumbled and all this kind of stuff. And, how would you get the music? You'd have to buy cassette tapes. So the whole vision of iPod was that, it's digital music that you can carry thousands of songs in something that truly fit in your pocket. I don't think, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody was there, I don't think anybody thought of podcasting.
Interesting, because obviously, podcasts now go on Apple,
No
and a lot of
kidding.
people use, yes, so and a lot of people use, their Apple devices to listen to podcasts. So I just wondered if, if you had some back end knowledge there. What do you
Well,
think I
but
mean,
this is,
obviously, go ahead.
oh, sorry. So
No,
this
go ahead.
is, I'll give you some insights into Silicon Valley. So, podcasting is hugely successful, and I think it is a very important contribution to history. For many people, it is the new writing, it is the new oral tradition, right? And it's a way of continuing the story. But I don't think anybody anticipated how it would grow and it would become this valuable. But a little insight into Silicon Valley perspective is, we throw a lot of things up against the wall. Some of them stick, and then we go up to the wall, we paint the bullseye around what's stuck, and then we say, we hit the bullseye. Well, you can say you hit the bullseye after you see what's stuck to the wall because you painted the bullseye after you see what's stuck to the wall. So that's another insight into how the Silicon Valley mind works. We are very, very good at declaring victory.
Ah, interesting. And so, from the perspective of what you just shared, where do you think podcasting is going to go in the future? I mean, it's obviously it's been around a while. It's gained a lot of traction, I would say, in the last, I'd say, a couple of years in particular. But still, a
Yes.
lot of people don't have podcasts. So, where do you see it going in the future?
Honestly, I think that podcasting is probably the new book publishing. Honestly, I have done 15 books, and I have done one podcast with, I don't know, 30 episodes. And podcasts have such an advantage. There are people who don't like to read. Those are people who listen to audiobooks. But for me, the fundamental flaw with book publishing is that it takes so long, even with self-publishing. So it takes a good 6 to 12 months to write a book. And then it takes another 6 to 12 months for it to be published by a traditional publisher. So I'm talking about the worst case, but also maybe the most lucrative case, right? So let's say it takes 18 months to 2 years to get a book out from the time you get the idea. And along the way, there are so many hurdles. You have to find an agent, you have to find a publisher. The publisher has to go through content editing, go through copy editing. Then it has to be printed and released and all that. And in the middle of a pandemic, most bookstores aren't open yet, or if they are open, they only let a small handful of people go in. And people aren't exactly wanting to touch books that other people have touched. So there's a lot of issues there. And I know that from the moment that you finish a book, it's frozen. Now, yes, version one can have typos fixed and stuff like that, but to completely change it takes an act of God. So I wrote The Art of the Start, and then I wrote The Art of the Start version two. There was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years between the two, and version two was just as hard to write as version one. It was a complete rewrite. I think with a podcast, because of the immediacy of a podcast, it is so much easier. So, you know, Um, the guest this week is going to be the governor of the state of Hawaii. And he and the government of Hawaii have done a remarkable thing by making Hawaii the state with the least amount of coronavirus. So that's a remarkable story. Well, if I were a traditional book writer, I could be writing about David Ige and the remarkable story of Hawaii and the coronavirus. You would not read about that for 18 months to 2 years. And by then, who knows, where Hawaii would be, where the coronavirus would be. But now, 2 weeks after I interviewed him, it's going to be live tomorrow. And the book that Peg and I wrote about the art of social media, which to this day I think is maybe the de facto standard in social media, uh, we wrote that 4 years ago. And back then, guess what was the hottest social media website? Google Plus. Oops. So Peg and I have, toyed with the idea of revising the art of social media. I mean, there was no TikTok. Google Plus was hot. Instagram was there, but it certainly wasn't the force that it is today. And I mean, it's so different. We need to revise the art of social media. So the principles of the art of social media are still good, but some of the examples and stuff are so wrong.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know this or not. I think we've spoke about this one other time, but we talked about Twitter and how much we tweeted, and you got, I
Yeah,
think the conversation was, well, people are always dinging me because I tweet so much. And I'm like, well, I do it
yeah.
too. I learned that from you, by the way. So when I was first starting in social media, I was reverse engineering all the influencers, right? I was like, okay, well, what are they doing? Like, it must be working for them. So, and why is it working? So I spent a lot of time like dissecting what I can, successful people. You were successful with Twitter. Now, where do you spend the majority of your time today? What social platform?
Oh, I was gonna say surfing, but the majority of the time that I spend on social media is without doubt LinkedIn. I think that LinkedIn is good or is the best of all worlds because the people that you're interacting with on LinkedIn are very likely to be who they say they are. That is not true on Twitter and Facebook. And so I think that LinkedIn is probably the most useful social media platform right now. That's not to say that I don't block people on LinkedIn because I block a lot of people on LinkedIn, but at least I'm pretty sure I'm blocking real people as opposed to Russian bots. So
Yes.
I think that for a professional, LinkedIn is probably the most useful social media platform. For a business, particularly a business like I'm an advisor to a company called Merge 4, which sells the coolest socks, right? So for a business that is fashion, apparel, or food, I would say Instagram is the most useful platform. And believe it or not, I still believe that Facebook, because of targeting that's possible, may be the most useful advertising platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I would totally agree with everything you just said. I have would have said in the past that it's a great question, Pauline. Just a second, and I'll ask Guy about that. But I would, in the past, I would have shied away from LinkedIn. It was my least favorite social platform. But once
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
added live video to their platform, and I was able to incorporate that in and see the results, I'm a convert now. I'm like, I'm loving LinkedIn. So I totally agree with you on that. So Pauline just asked the question, how do you learn podcasting? Do you have a resource you recommend, or did you just dive in and figure it out as you went?
Well, this is a complex story. So um, there are there's lots of learning to do with podcasting. At one level, it's simply, what equipment do I use? What services do I use? And for that, I have to attribute much of my success to Jeff Sieh, who is the sound designer of Remarkable People. So, he opened my eyes to what can be done with sound design. And I have some very strong recommendations about what tools to use. So I use Squadcast to do interviews. The reason why I use Squadcast is unlike Zoom or Skype or any of those other things, they're doing compression to transmit as little data as possible. What Squadcast does is it creates a local recording on each end. So if I were to interview for my podcast, Kim, your computer would have a local file of what you're saying. My computer would have a local file, no loss of data. And then those files are uploaded to the cloud, but the recording is done locally. And if you think about it, that's intellectually and technically a vastly superior way to record a podcast. I also use a product called Descript, and Descript creates an automatic transcript of the audio, and then you edit the transcript like you're editing a word processor, and that editing is reflected in the audio. So if you have a guest that starts off the answer to a question like, well, yeah, let me tell you about Steve Jobs. All you want is from let me tell you about Steve Jobs on, or you can select all the but, you can select all of that and tell Descript to ignore all that text, which when you export the audio will have all that audio removed. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is I use this device to do most of my recording. This is a Zoom H6. And I have found that this is just bulletproof. It has 4 inputs. I use a Countryman microphone. So, I use these 2 things most of the time. Even when I do Squadcast, which is remote, I'm recording my voice on this. I'm recording my voice on Squadcast, and I'm recording the guest voice on Squadcast. So I have 2 copies of my voice because Jeff Sieh always likes redundancy. So now that's the sort of technical tips about podcasting. The rest is it's not clear to me that I'm qualified to really comment about how to have an optimal podcast because I'm learning as I go. But I just try to ask questions. It takes 2 or 3 hours of prep for each guest. And I look into their Wikipedia entry. I look into their website. I look into their social media. I try to read at least one book that each guest has written. Not that every guest has written a book. And I do all this, and then I just try to ask questions that, bring out their remarkableness.
I love that. I love that. And I think there's a moral to this story, guys. Don't let not knowing impede you from taking action, because you learn as you go, and do it messy is my point.
Yes.
I have been doing so much stuff messy instead of getting wrapped up in the perfectionism of it. So as we're choosing the winners, I want to be cognizant of Guy's time. Guy, I have one last question for you.
Sure.
What inspires you to continue to evolve you personally and your brand? That's a big question.
It is a big question, but I have a small answer. So the small answer is that I have 4 children. 2 are, I've had 2 IPOs, meaning that they're graduated from college and they're out. I still have 2 in the incubator, both of which have tuition. So I'm motivated by expenses. I have lots of tuition to pay. And you mentioned the word branding. I will tell you that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Guy Kawasaki brand. Now, I try to avoid absolutely faux pas and just mind-boggling stupidity. Don't get me wrong, but I don't want you to think that I have a plan that I have thought about where I say, okay, so Guy, you need to position yourself as a thought leader, and you need to write white papers, and you need to have this kind of things and this kind of this and this kind of appearance to make you into, thought leader, guru, expert, whatever. I kind of just do what I want to do. And Peg Fitzpatrick, who's probably watching this and is responsible for much of my social media, particularly podcasts, she's rolling over in her grave right now because she knows that I just let it go, and sometimes she has to pull me back. But So, well, there's a lesson there, which is, Jeff C knows how to do sound design much better than I, and Peg Fitzpatrick knows how to do social media much better than I. So, duh, find people who are better than you at the skills you need, and not try to, roll all your own. It's a real talent. You know, in the Macintosh division, we used to have a saying that A players hire A players. So, and I think that's understating it. I think A players hire A plus players. And in this case, I have two A plus players, Jeff C and Peg Fitzpatrick. And they make me look good. Thank God for Peg C and Peg C. Jeff Fitzpatrick.
Yes, I am totally in agreement. I've always said focus on your strengths and outsource your weaknesses, you know.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. Peg is probably going to give you what for, because one of the things I like about Peg the most is that she absolutely pulls no punches. You know, if you ask her what she thinks, she will tell you. And sometimes even if you don't ask her what she thinks, she will tell you. So she's probably gonna tell you some things after you're through. And Jeff is amazing too. Jeff produces my show. For those of you who are listening or watching, if you want a show produced or if you want a podcast produced, get in touch with him. He's amazing. Okay, so Wise Guy book winner is Terry Ann James. So Terry, if you would do me a quick favor, sweetie, if you will go to the top of my Facebook page where it says message and send me your mailing address, and we will get that book out in the mail to you ASAP. And then who won the art of social media and the others? Let's see, who are our winners? Okay, we got that one. The next enchantment is Suzette Denise Garrett Teague. I hope I said that correctly, Suzette. Suzette, same. If you will go to the message button and send us your mailing address, we will get the book out to you ASAP today. And then we have the Art of Social Media book winner is Amy. Amy, I'm so glad you won. You're going to love this book. It's chock full. Even though, like Guy said, things have changed a lot in the social media space, there is still a ton of what I would call evergreen amazingness in this little book. So, and then easel winners are
Oh my God.
Pauline, Deborah, and Suvesh. Guys, if you all we need from you, same thing. Go to the message button and send us your email address, not your mailing address. All right, yay! Congrats to the winners. All right, so Guy, I just want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing your amazing wisdom with everybody, and your openness, willingness to give us the skinny. Sometimes those questions are like, well, that was a little personal, but I appreciate you being.
I just want to slip my wrists here. I don't know what happened this morning. There's so many times. Kim, I'm. Too bad we didn't have this in a week, because on Thursday or Friday I'm putting in AT&T fiber optics into this house, because I am not going to go through this again. So sorry about
I
that.
know. No, there's nothing worse than tech issues. Trust me, I've had
Uh,
lights fall on my head. I've had a lot of things happen. It's not
I,
a big deal. So,
I was once, speaking of lights fall on your head, I was once on a show with Mari Smith, and literally the lights fell on us.
yes,
It was a
it
viral, it was
happens.
a viral moment.
Yes, exactly. So, well,
So I
thank
don't
you
know
so
what you
much for being
said. Oh, sorry. I don't know what you said, but I hope you told everybody go to remarkablepeople.com, sign up for my podcast,
well,
okay? Because
that was
that
what I
is the
was getting
best
ready.
work I've done.
That was what I was getting ready to ask you. If you could let everybody know where they can connect with you. I definitely want them to check out the Remarkable People podcast, but what do you have somewhere that you would like to share that people can connect with you?
Well, honestly, the easiest way is Gmail. So it's my name, Guy Kawasaki at Gmail. That's the best way.
Wow. Did you all see that or
What?
hear that? He just gave his
What?
email address as a way for you guys to connect with him. Hello.
Why not?
I'm hoping you guys, that's like, and I've never ever had a guest that did that. So I'm like, oh my gosh,
Why?
kudos to you.
I'll give you my phone number if you want. I mean.
That is awesome. That is so awesome. So awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you for all of you that were with us. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something amazing from it. Thank you for spending a little bit of your time today with us. I know time is valuable, and I appreciate the fact that you spent some with Guy and I. So have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe.